Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to a slightly late August edition of Molten Music Monthly. Well, it's been a bit of a grey and wet and sticky summer so far, and there's not a whole lot going on in the world of music technology, but I've tried to gather together a few bits and pieces, so we'll probably get through this relatively quickly this time. Hooray! I hear people say. But hey, here's what we've got coming up. BoredBrain adds an EQ and an instrument injector to their imminent OPT to the imminent Opt-X. A RecoSynth curates a cool row of modular. The Korg Collection gets the prophecy. The museum of this museum is not Obsolete Museum opens. Tom gets his name back. AM Synths tackles the Jupiter 4 filter. Reason hits high definition in version 12. PolyEffects brings us a modular within a modular. Sound Objects goes hybrid with the GEK.KON. Toneboosters gets into virtual analog with the Flowtones. Toppobrillo Minimixes like a bookler. Sequential glances down market with the Take 5. DniPro gives us a KRAIT load of modulation, and UVI samples the heck out of a sampler. But first, here's the thing that's going to revolutionise your Euro rack. You did not know that you needed this until now. This is going to be the thing. This is the one that elevates you beyond what you thought you were doing in modular. You know, you're getting a grasp of it. You're starting to get things together. You're starting to produce sounds, modulations, weirdness, and also bringing it back to the heart and the soul of what the instrument is all about. Now it's time to move to the next level. And that level is provided by AI synthesis. In what form? I hear you say, how and what? What is it? I hear you saying they're clips, right? They're Euro-Rack cable clips, and they're just amazing. This, see this all crap here. You can completely sort that out with the AI synthesis Euro-Rack cable clips. It's just a little clip, little piece of plastic, screws in with your Nerly or your Euro-Rack screw or whatever it is you use to hold in your modules, and it provides a little place for running patch cables. You can tidy everything up to the tops and the bottoms of all your modules. It's just brilliant, so brilliant. It's like, well, why didn't we think of this before? Well, maybe we were cable tying things. Maybe we didn't care. Maybe we enjoy the exploration of getting yourself inside all of these cables when you could have been routing them beautifully all the way around your case. I often see people with tight patch cable routing where things are tied together and all over the place as if they're going to be sort of permanently patched, which to me is like, permanently patched Euro-Rack? No, it's never permanent. It's always ethereal. It's always temporary. It's always about to be evolved into something else, and you're going to need to be plugging that out, or you need that patch cable for something else because you've run out of patch cables and you're patching something somewhere else. So you have to steal something from somewhere to something. Yeah. So what I'm saying is the permanency of Euro-Rack cables is an illusion. It's a myth. It shouldn't exist. It's something which just drops into legend. So if you want to keep things tidy, then maybe a little clip held in by a little screw at the bottom of your module could be awesome. It gives you that ability to tidy stuff out of the way while not having it kind of cable tied to death in some kind of permanent fashion. It's very temporary, and I like that. I like that a lot. What else can I tell you about them? Oh no, I think that's it. I think it's like $10 for a pack of 10, which seems a little bit pricey. It's $1 for a clip for a little piece of plastic, but hey, no one else has done it. so fair play is what I say. Right, I can't see what's going on with those things on. So I was talking about BoredBrain. Now, I've spoken about this before, the Opt-X, which has now just arrived, along with a couple of other modules I thought I'd very quickly show you. So here's the Opt-X, 8 in and out, ADAT. So ADAT goes in, bottom to top, and then you've got DC coupled modulation coming out or in from your door, in and out, out and in, or audio in and out, straight through your audio interface through ADAT, giving you 8 channels in, 8 channels out. Bish bash bosh, it's done. awesome. You know, no scratching your head on the Expert Sleepers website. Just, you know, 8 and 8. What else would it possibly? Why would it be anything else? I was just mightily confused. Oh look, you can switch between 44.1 and 48. Nice. It's got lights. I haven't plugged it in yet. I plan to do something on this very soon, probably with Bitwig. Get things moving through your rack, both for recording and for modulation. So awesome. But I've talked about that previously, and I will talk about it some more, obviously. But what's a little bit newer is this. So new, I haven't even flipping opened it yet. We have this, which is the EQ X5. What does it do? Well, looking at it, I can tell you, you got high, high, mid, mid, low, mid, and low. EQ in modular. It's an interesting concept. You tend to just sort of blurt yourself out with modular. You know, it's coming out. Do you really care about the bits at the mastering end of things? Do you think about compression? Usually stump it through a load of reverb, but are we really thinking about frequency sculpting in anything outside a filter? Because I mean, EQ is a filter essentially, but it's a more intentional one. It's not necessarily a creative thing. It's perhaps more of a utility in shaping sound so that it comes out in a more pleasing and general sense. Are we that far down the road with Eurorack that we're actually thinking that? Or is that something that's going to happen more often in post? After you've recorded it, maybe you do a bit of EQ then. I don't really know the answer to that question because I haven't used any EQ within Eurorack as yet. So it's going to be interesting just to try that out, to see what the possibilities are. And also the CV control over the different bands. Interesting. I think it's a thoughtful module, and that's not something I often do in Eurorack. My Euroracking is thoughtless, I would say. I would say generally, because that's how I enjoy things. Cable at black, cable, very interesting, very interesting. The other one from BoredBrain is the Injectr. Now, the Injectr is a good-looking instrument interface. So you've got a big fat instrument in and a bit of a line out there. So you can plug a guitar in. It's a general idea. Plug your guitar in, and then you've got drive, character. You've also got envelope extraction, so you can route that as an envelope through your system to control other things, as well as gate as well. Interesting. I mean, I already have the Bafako instrument interface, which I've used a fair bit. So it's going to be interesting to see how this differs. It's got an effects sender return as well. Interesting. Interesting. So yeah, I'll be doing something or other on these very soon, but they are becoming available about now. All three of them, I believe. So expect some videos up in the next couple of weeks. I've got another week of not really making videos at the moment because of summer and children and schools and all that kind of thing. But in a week or two, I'm going to start getting back into making videos, and the Opt X will probably be my first one, I suspect, and then we'll see what kind of happens and develops after that. But I might be talking more about this at the end of the video. So, BoredBrain modules, interesting. Yeah, looking forward to doing some stuff on those. Now, my favourite Brazilian maker of modular and synthesizers is just on fire at the moment. Every week he seems to have a new thing out. He's unstoppable. Mr. Arthur Jolly, it's always good to see what he's up to. And this month, this week, this hour, he's been pushing out a curated modular system. So this is RecoSynth's take on what a row of Eurorack should look like. Now, you see me talk about this with the Wavephonics one. I've still got over here at the moment, and I find it interesting how some manufacturers are able to put together like a row of Eurorack, because it says a lot about what manufacturers feel we should be using within Eurorack, and it also gives us a clue as to perhaps what we should be doing, and maybe we shouldn't be mucking about with all the things we're mucking about, whether we need to get a bit more real in how synthesizers really work. Because us playing with it at this end, we don't have any clue how any of this works, whereas someone who's making modules and designing modules, I would make the leap and assumption that they have a clue and they know what they're talking about. So I find these things very interesting. With Arthur Jolly, of course, it's going to be something that looks somehow extraordinary, weird and fantastic all at the same time. And this, the Euro-Reco 2021, is one of those things. I mean, look at that case. It's fantastic. I mean, it really feeds into an aesthetic that I'm really into, or maybe I've always been into. I don't know, but it's being constantly fed by things like that Benedict Society TV show, and of course Loki. All this sort of futuristic but retro, stuck in the 70s, but in all the good parts of the 70s, not all the crap of the 70s. Because having lived through the 70s, I can tell you it was pretty rubbish for most things. But some of the fashion and the vibe and the aesthetic that came out of that, once you curate it into the now times where we have like clean drinking water and electricity that works, it can be awesome. So this kind of retro space age bunch of Euro-Rec from RecoSynth looks great. It really does look great. Now this is a relatively simple one. It's not overwhelmed with possibilities, but it does have 3 VCOs, and these are your classic SEM 3340 based VCOs, so the Prophet 5 VCO, and 3 of them together is going to make it sound potentially like something like the Sequential Pro 3, assuming you're going to play them together. And that's kind of what it's assuming. This is built very much as a synthesizer as opposed to an experimental modular playground. And so within there you get a nice fat low pass filter, which very, very handily has 3 inputs for your 3 oscillators. So that's sort of the architectural vibe. 3 oscillators together, you know, fat, thick, detuned slightly 3 oscillator lead line or bass line going through that one filter with a VCA, and then 2 envelopes, one for filter, one for the VCA. You can get the sense of what this is all about. Simple, easy, comes with an Arturia key step, all set up, ready to go. It's a fat 3 oscillator little mono synth. How fantastic is that? Looks great. Probably sounds great. Well, it's bound to sound great. You know, using those chips that always sound good, and through everything else that I know Arthur Jolly does, it's going to be a really great, warm, fat sort of sound. Now, the Korg collection of virtual synthesizers have been around forever. 20, 30 years, hasn't it? I remember doing a gig with it. Must have been my 40th, so that was 11 years ago, and I ran it on a netbook. I mean, we're talking about a net, I mean, I think it's over there, isn't it? Over there somewhere. See, look, never throw anything away. Here it is, a netbook. Remember these? Fantastic. Little mini laptop running on some kind of Atom processor. So I used this at a gig. It was my 40th birthday, I think, and I did an 80s gig. So we're talking, we did some Duran Duran, some Spandau Ballet, we did Aha, of course. You know, all that kind of stuff on synths. I had a performance pad, an Alesis performance pad, a synth or two. No, I didn't actually have a synth or two, so I didn't own any synths at that time. I had this running the Korg Collection, so I had an M1 type sounds going on. And in order to make it run on here without crackling, I had to overclock it. I mean, overclocking an Atom netbook was quite a thing, but I did it, man, because that's kind of the guy I am. Anyway, so after all of this time of having these classic Korg synths within it, and perhaps the most interesting thing is the way that they have this interface that allows you to do multis across all of them. So you've got a Poly 6, you've got a monopoly in there, you've got a wave station, I think, and the M1 and that kind of thing, and you can put them all together as a single standalone synthesizer. It's really, really very powerful, and has been for many, many years. So now version 3 dragged itself to version 3, and that brings in a couple of extra classics that are well worth it, I think. So what have they added? Well, they've added the Mini Korg 700S, which is that strange looking piece of hardware they've recently re-released, which sits on top of an organ and gives you like a mini synth, a mono synth lead sound to go along with your organ playing. Yeah, are you with me? Got all those controls at the front. So there's that. That's a nice thing. They've got the Triton Extreme. I'm not quite sure what the extreme bits mean, but I guess it's just a whole load of those sorts of 90s digital sounds. you know, big pads, big leads, big sounds, organic things with the twinkly stuff that goes on. You know, the jungle sound. You're in the jungle, there's tweeting birds and bits and pieces. Those kinds of big, huge multis that we enjoyed playing on M1s and Tritons and so on and so forth. Big workstation sounds. So it's got all that packed in as well. But probably what's most interesting, at least to me, is the Prophecy. Now, the Korg Prophecy was a glorious little synth. I mean, ugly, horrible plastic thing that you could hold around your neck, and it had this weird performance controller that you could manipulate with your hand and stuff. But the sounds in that thing would rip your head off. Just fantastic. And I remember exactly where it was in Turnkey on the rack of synths that I used to look after when I was working the shop floor. And you should always spend time on it because it was just a load of fun to use. And the Triton below it, very rarely actually touched that. But it's a classic lead synthesizer. Classic, it really is. So the whole collection is just, I think it's a phenomenal collection of classic Korg instruments that, if you're not particularly into hardware and you want to have their sound as authentic as you can possibly get, including things like the MS-20, then that is definitely the bundle to get. It's not cheap in terms of virtual instruments. They're not giving it away. It's always been a fair investment, but I think well worth your time if that's of interest to you. Look Mum No Computers Sam Battle's mysteriously bizarre museum is open. It was, I thought, called his Museum of Everything Else, but now I believe it's called This Museum Is Not, in brackets, Obsolete. In either way, he's a master of putting together words that make it difficult to say in a snapshot. So it's a museum of what? Of obsolete. No, not obsolete. Of everything else. Isn't what? So the idea is, right, that he's just got together a whole load of stuff that most people have forgotten about. Some of it, or much of it, is audio and synth based, but there's also other little nuggets in there as well, whether it's gaming consoles or telephony or old technology, valves and bits of stuff. And he's made it all accessible and interactable and flipping awesome by the looks of things. Crazy old oscillators and signal equipment and test equipment. His amazing 1000 oscillator synth is there. His Furby organ is there. Other weird stuff with relays and clickety-clackety stuff going on. I mean, it's just a treasure trove of weird and interesting technology that will blow the minds of kids these days, I should think, and make the rest of us go, oh, I used to have one of those. What a lovely thing. Oh, look at that. That kind of thing. It's not probably the place you could spend a day, but it's a place you could spend a good afternoon rummaging around and having a go. So Sam has opened it up. It's not exactly open daily from 9 to 5 or anything like that. You have to go to the website and sign up for some tickets on the particular days that it's open, because he really does want to curate it and look after it and personally involve himself in everything that happens. So he's not just letting it run. These are specific days set up as events. It costs a couple of quid to get in, which is just helping with the running costs. And you can go in and experience the mind, I think, partly the mind of Sam, but also this marvellous collection of just weirdness and stuff and modular synthesis. His own Cosmo modular synth stuff is there and other bits and pieces, and there'll be things you can play on, things you can have good times with. And it sounds like a fantastic afternoon. Where is it? It's in Ramsgate, which is right on the end of that bottom arse bit of the UK. So for some reason, I totally assumed it would be somewhere in the East End of London. But no, it's further east than that, all the way east out to the coast. So you could spend a day, out on the southeast coast of the UK and spend some time in the Museum of Everything Not Being Obsoleteness. Looks great. Go and check it out. Tom Oberheim, the founder of Oberheim, maker of things like the Oberheim synths and drum machines and stuff, things like the DMX, things like the I don't know, I can't remember anything. Things like the OBX, the OBXA, the SEM. He designed the SEM filter, of course, and then there's the 8 voice, the 2 voice, the 4 voice, lots of stuff. He's made all sorts of stuff. It's been like 36 years since he actually owned the name, because for various reasons, I mean, synth manufacturers, synth designers back in the 70s and 80s, they don't always have the best business sense in the world, and sometimes these things go awry. And it's really interesting to see how people like Dave Smith and Roger Lynn and Tom Oberheim, all these people have kind of come full circle. They produced these amazing things, designed these things, and then went off and did other stuff, and are now coming back to the world of synthesizers and finding it in need of them, in need of their stewardship, in need of their wisdom, things that they've learnt, and to bring back some kind of authenticity to what we're doing. It's great. It's an exciting time, and I'm so glad that these sorts of things are going on. So what happened to Oberheim? Well, let me give you the potted history, if I can remember. So, yeah, big fat Van Halen jump type OBXA polysynths. That's what we really think about when we think about Oberheim. We think about that particular synth, and we think about the SEM, which is the synthesizer expander module, which is like a little monosynth, well, a big monosynth in a chunky case, which would then be replicated into a 2-voice and a 8-voice and things like that. Those are the main things perhaps we think of. But in 1985 they ended up going into administration, which is a shame, and it was bought by a whole bunch of lawyers and kind of disappeared into itself, while Tom went on to do other things in other companies. But then it got acquired by Gibson, who really didn't do anything with it at all. Although we did get things like a re-release of the Matrix 1000, we got the Echoplex and the OBMX, and they licensed it to Viscount at one point, and they produced the OB12 digital synthesizer. So stuff happened, the name was used to some degree. But then when Tom came back to the world of synthesizers in 2009, he wasn't able to use his own name to put on his synthesizers. I mean, he did some great things. He did a new version of the SEM. He was forever threatening to do Eurorack versions of the SEM as well, but none of those have actually appeared so far. And he ended up doing a new version of the 2-voice called the 2-voice Pro. And of course, he collaborated with Dave Smith on the OB6, which is done by Sequential. But none of those things was he able to put the Oberheim name on, or that terrible logo of the dancing musical notes, which is just like, no, you don't want that back, mate. You want someone to redesign you something kind of cool and interesting, not this terrible old hackneyed dancing notes thing. But that's just me. Anything with musical notes on in terms of logo or something is just, no, I think that's terribly crass. and gauche or something. Anyway, but that's just my own snobbery, so forget about that. Anyway, with Tom back on the scene doing a thing, Gibson did a nice thing and gave him back his rights to his name in the US, which was great. So he could now start producing synthesizers with his own name on the front in the US, but not in the rest of the world, because Behringer had picked up the rights to the Oberheim name a few years previously, when it went fishing for a whole bunch of names that were no longer in use, and bought them all up. Which you can do. I mean, there's nothing terrible in that. They wanted they had this plan, this mission, as we know, they're in this mission of recreating lots and lots of vintage synthesizers, and so it makes sense for them to pick up disused names so they can stick that on the front of their gear. That makes sense to me. But obviously, with the Oberheim name and Gibson giving that name back to Tom, meant that Behringer couldn't use the name globally. So they might be able to use it in Asian and European markets, but they couldn't really use it globally, and then that's just not really going to work. So it seems that in a moment of clarity, Uli Behringer said, all right, Mr. Oberheim, you can have your name back, and then that's fantastic. Isn't that great? Don't we all feel lovely and warm about that? And aren't I really a lovely guy? And that's what we have, and that's what we're going to absolutely assume happened. And any rumours of any other battles in the background or anything else, don't want to listen to any of that. I'm just absolutely assuming that this is a completely beautiful exchange between a couple of people in the synthesizer industry, and it's a wonderful thing. And hopefully Mr. Oberheim will continue to produce some synthesizers, and we will see more stuff coming out with his name stamped on the front. So there we go. Exciting times. AM Synths continues to look at and recreate and replicate old bits of synthesizers and brings them into Eurorack. The latest one is the AM 8104, which is a take on the Roland Jupiter 4 filter. Both the high and low pass filter are included in this module, and they're split in such a way that you get the low pass filter on a pair of knobs and the high pass filter on a nice little slider in the middle, which gives it, I don't know, it gives it an interesting vibe. I mean, the Roland stuff is generally speaking always on sliders, so he hasn't gone for a 2-slider affair like perhaps you would have found on the synth itself, but splitting it off into high and low pass, I don't know, gives it an interesting look and something different and a different way to play with things. He's unearthed a whole bunch of chips in order to try to make it as authentic as possible, and everything down to the capacitors is made to produce as accurate a sound as possible, as we know AM synths are very good at doing. There's one interesting feature on it, which is the keyboard follow feature. Now obviously if you've got a keyboard synth and you have keyboard follow, the idea is that it moves the filter relative to the pitch, so that as you go up you're not losing the space where the filter is. You don't get, go into more filter trouble, but the filter is, it comes up with you, so you're always on that same sound, always on that same tonality depending on which pitch you're playing. So keyboard following is very useful within a synthesizer keyboard. In modular you don't necessarily have a keyboard, so where is that pitch information coming from? You're not putting pitch information into a filter necessarily, you're putting an audio signal, unless you're control voltaging it gets less easy, less straightforward to do that. But what AM synths are doing is they are tapping into the Doepfer bus system. What is that? I don't know. So Doepfer have this way of using the power bus to carry control voltage, and so anything which is compatible with that can pull out a couple of the lines. Because if you look on the back of a module, you see you've only got a few. You've got a relatively small, what is that, 10-pin connector, whereas on the power bus itself, like when you look at the cables, when you're connecting to the power bus, it's a much larger port. So you've actually got a whole bunch of pins on here which aren't used for anything, I don't think. So Doepfer came up with this idea of using this and having the similar sized one on the module, so you could use those extra pins to carry control voltage. Just genius. Why don't we all do that? Why isn't that a standard? I have no idea. I've only really just sort of found out about it myself. So the AM Synths 8104 uses that, and so can use pitch information coming from that to do the keyboard follow thing. Are you with me? Good. It suggests on the website that this was particularly useful in something like the Waldorf KB37 keyboard that had modular in it, because that followed that very idea for all of those very, very useful reasons. And that's cool, but sadly that keyboard I think is kind of on its way out or discontinued or something. But if you have other modules that are compatible with the CV bus, then that gives you that extra angle, that extra something to play with, which is pretty awesome. Now Reason is hitting version 12. It's actually hitting version 12 tomorrow, so I don't have when I'm filming this anyway, so I don't have the full skinny on exactly what it's all about, or it's probably out there. Well, I don't know, I just haven't looked into it. So Reason 12, right, but the big things as far as I can work out is it's gone high definition, because I mean Reason it's been around a long time, and that interface has largely remained unchanged in its slightly cartoony form, and on high definition screens it started to get a little bit sort of ragged around the edges as far as its resolution is concerned. So with the new version 12, they've redesigned the GUI so that it now expands and contracts depending on the resolution of your screen, and always looks beautiful. The other thing they've done is they're introducing a new sampler. They've already had their standard sort of Akai sampler type modules in there, the thing and the other one, but this is a different, more creative sampler which will do slicing or not slicing, or single shots or multi shots, and all that sort of stuff. It looks much more like a synthesizer with all the synthesizer sort of parts within it, filters, envelopes, LFOs, all that kind of rigmarole. So that's an interesting instrument to bring into it. They've also updated the combinator. Now the combinator is how you bring together a whole load of different synthesizers within reason to give it a single front end to make that a bit simpler, easier to cope with. It's a really lovely idea, and the latest version apparently improves upon that, enhances it, gives you more macro controls that you can easily assign to stuff. It's brilliant. I've got a lot of time for Reason, a lot of time. I think it's a fantastic DAW. It takes a little bit of time to get to grips, I find, with the recording interface if I've been using other DAWs. So it takes a little bit of time just to get into the vibe of what it's doing, but once you're in there, I mean, it's a fantastic resource. And particularly now, as the version last enabled it to become a plugin in other things rather than having to use Rewire, you know, that just takes it to a whole nother level, I think. It's a great, fantastic sound resource. Hector from PolyEffects. Well, this is a thing. I mean, this started life as a pedal, like a crazy pedal, I think. A pedal that contained a whole modular environment, a whole modular world, which could be effects, could be synthesizers, could be all sorts of things, and it was stuck in a pedal by your feet. Whereas now it's finally found its way into Euro-Rack. So the idea, or the concept, is that you have an entire modular environment, like, for instance, VCV Rack, or like Soft-Tube Modular, or Voltage Modular, that sort of thing, built into a module which then sits in your rack, which then gives you the ability to create monster patches within itself, which you can then integrate with your hardware. So it kind of gives you a reason not to have any of the hardware right within a piece of hardware, running software that's like your hardware. It gets a little bit sort of inside itself in an Inception kind of way, I think, which is the reality and which is the virtual, and it's hardware running, I don't know, but let's not get bogged down in that. The point is that this is completely fascinating and you have this touchscreen interface which seems to work relatively well, where you bring up modules, you link them together, and then you assign CV inputs and outputs to them. There's no sort of knobs or anything, so you are stuck with a screen that you're having to move around and access all the parameters for all the different modules through that sort of interface. Is that a problem? No, not necessarily. We're very at home with these sorts of things. When you look at 1010 Music and all their kind of modules, it's a similar vibe, but this seems to contain quite a vast array of modules, and perhaps that's the point, that it can be extremely complex and you can build an entire rack of modular within this one thing and then route it out to the rest of your hardware. I don't know, I mean, my brain just starts to go, I don't know why, oh, this is really, really interesting, but why am I spending all of my time looking at this screen on this little module when actually I have all these things, and I like that movement and that change and moving to that thing and doing that, moving to that. I don't know that I want to look at a screen and move something on that and then having to page through and move another thing, page through and move another thing. I don't know. On the other hand, I quite like the idea of crafting something together in a digital space, you know, whether that's on a computer or in a little thing here, crafting something, working on it. You know, I'm not against that particularly. And then that then comes alive within your rack. So, I mean, maybe it's really interesting. Maybe it could be the making of it. I just, you know, my brain goes back to the Disting, which is an enormously useful module which has got a whole pack of stuff in it that's really hard to use. Or when I look at something like the Befacco Lich and the Witch, which both offer DSP run patches and modulars within it, which is really interesting, and I hope to do some videos on those soon. But at the same time, it's always going to be hampered by the knob doesn't do what it says it will do, or the knob doesn't actually say anything because it could be anything. And so multifunctional devices within modular, although useful, aren't necessarily the way that my personal creativity or my workflow really works through things. Does that make any sense? But with the Hector, I mean, you've got over 100 modules in there. You know, fascinating stuff that you can't afford to have in hardware. Whether it's you know, looping, envelopes, modulation, sequencers, Euclidean this, that, and probability other, different sorts of oscillators, wavetables, sampling, probably, I don't know, all that kind of jazz going on within this thing. So you could use it just as a single module if you wanted, but then why would you do that? I don't know, it goes round and round. I'd love to have a go to sit down with it and try to work out, is this worth my time? Is it worthwhile? Is it pulling creative things into it? Maybe it's the sort of thing that you could stick into a smaller system that could be the heart of it. You know, it could be the thing that generates all the sound that you then modulate and craft through other things. Because I mean, it's that thing about an oscillator that you don't really touch an oscillator once you've actually got it sounding how you want to. All the crafting is done elsewhere. So maybe it's an awesome sound source. I don't know. The one thing that's slightly annoying is that on the pedal you've got an encoder or two, and you've got bypass buttons because you use it with your feet potentially. You don't have any of that on the Euro-Reco version, and I think that's a mistake because things like bypassing is really useful, particularly if you've got a lot of effects in there, and it does have a lot of effects because you've got to think of it as in a guitar context. It's going to have a lot of effects patching within it because that's you're going to be feeding it audio and expecting it to do things, and so being able to turn things on and off easily is a very useful tool to have. And just because it's in Euro-Reco doesn't mean you're going to not want to do that. Funnily enough, that's why the Matrix mixer RecoSynths that I've spoken about and done a video on, I find that a really useful way of turning things on and off simply, quickly and easily with patches within your Euro-Reco. And that has quite a large effect on changing the sound. I'm making a sound, I'm making a patch sounds great, but with a touch of a button I can reroute everything to different effects, and that gives a whole different feel to things. So that's quite interesting, and I think that's perhaps where its strength may lie. I don't know until you try is the truth of it. You don't really know how well that's going to work or not until you give it a go. But it's a fascinating thing, and it's a great development, and I know that a lot of people really like the Bebo, the pedal version, and so it's something I'd like to have a go on at some point. The Mysterious Sound Objects is coming along with another one called the GEK.KON. It's a digital lo-fi monosynth. Now, Sound Objects is this synthesizer company in Russia that's kind of being looked after by Modular Moon. And Anna Martinova from Modular Moon has been providing us with documentation and manuals, and she's using them within the school to teach synthesis. And she's been hoping to send me some of their stuff for ages, but apparently they just keep selling out. They keep selling by the bucket load. So they're obviously doing something right. But I do finally have one here. This is Sound Object number 5, which is interesting. I love the fact it's labelled in Russian and English. That's fantastic. I haven't turned it on yet. That's another thing I'm going to be looking at in the next couple of weeks. But by the by, they have this other one called the GEK.KON, which, as I say, is digital and has a lot of weirdness / coolness going on inside. It got these 2 oscillators that you can mess about with. They've got 4 different waveforms, and they all come with some weird kind of digital crunchiness. At the moment, the information on it is quite small. They sort of give you just a little bit. They just give you a taster and go, this is quite interesting. It makes all these sorts of weird sounds. It's got a lot of modulation possibilities. It's got an interesting way that you assign things. And it has seemingly a dual peak analog filter messing everything about. But as with all the Sound Object stuff, I hope to get my hands on it at some point in order to open it up a bit, just to see what on earth this thing is all about. And so I'll look forward to getting my hands on a GEK.KON at some point to see if I can do something about that. Flowtones from Toneboosters looks like a decent virtual analog synthesizer. Virtual analog. So it's focusing on trying to sound a bit fat and warm, sounding vintage, sounding like a synthesizer should probably sound like. And so, as they say, this is all down to the modelling of circuitry. It's all about getting to grips with the inner components of real hardware and translating that across to a software environment. Very interesting. It sounds great, I have to say, although now I'm going to get a little bit critical of it. Because this came along, I was having a look and they were talking about how, this is great, it's virtual analog, we know all about it. We've done this great stuff, this modelling, there's all these bits, you've got 30 filter types, you've got all these different wave shapes, you've got morphing between them, lots of modulation, tons of LFOs and envelopes and everything else. And I'm going, okay, that's great. And having a look at it and then having a play with it, it's like, this is for the iPad, isn't it? Not that there's anything wrong in that, but it was evidently designed for iOS. Now, that's great. That's not my criticism. iOS is super. Don't get on your horse about that. It's super. It's lovely, but it requires a certain interface. It requires a very touchy interface, something that's nice and big that you can get your fingers onto, and that's great. And so, essentially, synthesizers for iOS get compromised, or rather compromises have to be made in order to allow you to use it as an interface. And that's fine. That's all good. Now, what I'm sort of slightly taking umbrage with is that this has now been ported to VST. It's a VST synth, except they've made no changes to the interface whatsoever. So that means that all of the compromises they've had to make in producing it for iOS are being pulled over to the VST version, which is like, why? Why can't I see both oscillators on the screen at the same time? Why can't I see both oscillators and all the modulation on screen at the same time? Why is everything still tabbed? Everything's still paginated. Why do I have to go through page and page? So I'm wanting to modulate the filter, but I can't have the LFO and the filter on the same page at the same time. So I'm going to have to page back, change the LFO, page back to the filter, readjust that, come back, LFO, just that, and the envelopes as well. It's all on different pages. And as I say, on a little tablet, that's great. On a computer, I've got this massive screen, right? I can have every knob and every parameter out, and I would like them to be there, please. I require no tabbing, no paging. I don't want my modulation on a different screen. I want it all on the same screen, damn it. You know, and this goes for a lot of virtual instruments out there. It's just that this particular piece of software did it so ineptly that it got right up my nose. And now thinking about it, there's a lot of synthesizers that do that. There's several that don't. I mean, if you look at the Rob Papen ones or the UE ones, for instance, those particularly tend to have everything out on the screen, and that's good. I mean, it sometimes looks a little bit small, but that's all right because I'm using a mouse, and so grabbing controls is not a problem. They can be as small as you like. I don't care. What's more important is that I can see how different things relate to each other. I can see how the modulation is relating to the oscillators and relating to the filters. I can see that. I can identify it. If you're going from page to page, you lose track of what that's all about, and it really hampers your ability to do synthesis, which is surely the point of your synthesizer. So, yeah, do go and check it out because it sounds great. I mean, they've done a really good job on it. It's just, it really highlights how companies who produce software need to think a little bit more about the different formats that they're using. And you can't just go from iOS to Windows to VST and just leave it the same. I don't think that does us a particularly good service. Thanks very much. This is rather nice, the Minimix from Toppobrillo. Not come across these guys before. It's apparently inspired by a Buchla mixer and offers 6 channels with soft mutes, voltage controlled panning, and you can chain them together to produce more, which is nice. I like that because 6 channels doesn't ever feel quite enough. I don't think. So what's interesting about it? Well, I mean, it's nice, compact, slider-based mixer, for first of all, so it's sort of winning on all those points. Soft mutes are nice so that you can just take stuff out without there being any possibility of clicks. But what perhaps is interesting about this one in particular is the panning. So voltage controlled panning. Don't use panning a whole lot in modular. Again, it's one of those things that you just tend to forget about because everything is running around kind of mono and it all just emerges, pours out the other end. I tend to put everything through a stereo reverb, which perhaps gives it a little bit more space, but otherwise I'm not too worried about it. So panning within this mixer offers up something quite interesting, and it also forces something quite interesting. Now, as I understand it, you've got manual panning control over channels 2 to 5. So those middle 4, you've got little panning knobs. 1 and 6 are different. 1 and 6 are voltage controlled, and so 1 is all the way over to the left, 6 is all the way over to the right. So that's their starting point. Their default is hard panned left and right. So then you have to add some voltage, some modulation or some source of voltage into their CV inputs in order to bring them in. So it's like it's forcing you to modulate even before you've done anything else, which will start to move it around your stereo field and could get accidentally interesting. Do you know what I mean? Because I haven't thought about panning particularly, or voltage control panning even, but because it's coming hard out of one side, that particular channel, it's going to encourage you to go, oh, I don't know that I want that just to stay there, so I'm going to start moving it about, and that then creates an interesting stereo field and may poke you down the road of doing some more of that. Ooh, and this one over, yeah, you know, you're going to have to move. I don't know, it's just interesting. I like modules that kind of push you into different spaces and into ideas of doing things. Very interesting. Anyway, but it looks quite nice. It's quite simple. It does have 2 stereo channels that you can use on 2 and 3 if you prefer, and it has headphone output and level outputs, and as I say, you can go from one to another, so it's got like auxiliary inputs to come of the output of the previous Minimix into another Minimix to give you 12 channels that just mixes on through. Does that make sense? I think so. The thing it's missing for me, sadly, is any kind of auxiliary, because personally, I need, at some point, I need to route everything through a reverb. I need a send and a return. That's what I need more than anything. And any mixer module that I'm using properly to mix, as opposed to just mixing a couple of signals together, I find I really need that. Otherwise, I'm having to double up on stuff, and that gets more and more complicated. So, yeah, interesting. I wish I had an aux, but otherwise, well, an interesting module. Probably the biggest news of the month is the Sequential Take 5. Take 5. What a terrible name for a synthesizer. Putting that to one side for the moment, what on earth is the Take 5? Well, the Take 5, I can't quite exactly grasp it yet. I think I will in time, but at the moment my first impressions, my initial impressions are that this looks and feels like a very generic analog synthesizer, and that's not really what you want from Sequential. Or is it? I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, looking at it, you just go, yeah, all right. I mean, it's a synthesizer. 2 oscillators. It's got all your usual envelope filters. You know, nice big cut-off knob. Yeah, I appreciate that, but it doesn't scream Sequential at you. It doesn't look like the Pro 3. It doesn't look like the Prophet 5. It doesn't look like those sorts of instruments that we've come to know and love from Sequential, and in some ways we've come to demand. We demand something which is an instrument, something which is more than just being a synthesizer. I mean, the first thing that struck me is that it doesn't have the word Sequential written on it. I mean, if I'm going to buy a flipping Sequential synthesizer, I'm going to want it to say Sequential on it, aren't I? I think I am. So it is difficult. I mean, essentially, you could look at it as a more of a budget Prophet 5. So it had those 5 voices, Take 5 voices. It has the same 2 oscillators. Apparently, the filter is based on the Prophet 5 filter, and so you end up with a preset-driven analog, we think, synthesizer, which is probably going to sound great. It has all the usual sorts of controls you've come to expect. It just, at the moment, from looking at the images, for me, it doesn't have that specialness. It doesn't have that specialness that I've come to expect from Sequential, or from someone like Moog. You know, a similar idea. That there's something about what they do that makes it special, that elevates it, that brings class with it. And I'm struggling to find the classiness with this particular thing. Now, on the other hand, it's a good size for people who like that sort of size. If you must have big octaves, then look elsewhere. You know, there's no point having an argument about it. Oh, I wish it had more octaves. Well, it doesn't. You know, this is what we've got. And for many people, it fits into that vibe, like the Korg Modwave, like the Cobalt 8 or Argon 8. That kind of vibe, and that's really interesting. I don't mind smaller octaves. That's fine with me, and it fits into a good space. And its pricing is around 1,100 quid, 1,100-1,200 quid, which, although more expensive than the Mode Electronics ones or the Korg ones, it does bring it down to potentially a more affordable level. So perhaps this is Sequential looking down market a little bit and going, well, maybe we can produce something cheaper and simpler, you know, that's not going to be quite so special as the £3,000 Prophet 5 or the 1,500 quid Rev 2. you know, which is not that far away from this. So I don't know. I'm still in many minds about it. It's interesting that it has a vintage knob, which is something taken from the new Prophet 5 Rev 4, which introduces instability into the oscillator so that it sounds a bit different and a bit vibey and vintagey. That's a good thing, but also makes you feel that perhaps it's a little bit too well made. Does that make any kind of sense? No, probably not. So I'm not quite sure what to make of it. I'm slightly disappointed by the look. It doesn't look classic. It looks like an Access Virus, to be honest. It looks like a synth from the wrong time of vintageness. It looks like a synth from the late 90s, which is not the best time, I don't think. So I don't know. And also that E on take is, again, it's that musical note kind of dancing thing, which I don't like it. So same with the Oberheim logo with that, and piano ties. I don't like any of those things, I'm afraid. I'm just a snob when it comes to infusing things with musical related stuff. Does that make... I don't know. Anyway, so I don't by any means hate it. I'm not trying to be down on it. I just don't fully understand it. I need to spend some time with some videos. Ideally, I need to spend some time with it myself to understand how good it is at being a synthesizer, what it sounds like. Does it bring a vibe that's different to something else you could get for a lot less? I don't know. Is it truly purely analog all the way through? Because that seems to be not spoken of directly on the website like it is with other synthesizers. So I don't know, scratching my chin on it a little bit. I mean, the idea in my head that I could own a sequential synthesizer is very exciting. That's very exciting. But I want that name. I want that name on the front, not on the back. No one's going to see it on the back unless I'm on stage, I suppose. But it's going to be here. It's going to have its back facing the wall, where no one can read the fact that it's a sequential synthesizer. And will you be able to hear that it's a sequential synthesizer? I don't know. I mean, if it's got those SEM 3340 oscillators inside, then everybody uses those. What could it possibly be bringing? You know, we talk, and when we justify the cost of something like the Prophet 5 or Prophet 10 because it's such an instrument, because of the enormous amount of space it has for knobs, the quality of the knobs, the loveliness of the wood, you know, it becomes an instrument. And all of those things seem to be missing from the Take 5. It's become a synth like somebody else's synthesizer. So I don't know. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on it, because at the moment I'm in many minds about whether it's a fantastic thing. I mean, if it was 800 quid and it had sequential written on it, then I think we would be talking. But I don't know. Interesting. Well, I'm looking forward to reviews of it. You know, if I get hold of one myself, which would be awesome, I would love to do an in-depth review of it, and just to find out what it's all about, because I sense there's other people out there with the same sort of feeling that I'm having, that don't really know. You know, if you're the sort of person who owns a Prophet 5, then it's not for you. You know, if you're a synth collector, that's fine. But if someone like myself, who for buying a synthesizer is a big major flipping deal, spending £1,000 on something, that's huge. And so is it enough for a taste of sequential? Or should I be buying a Summit, you know, a Novation Summit, or a Matriarch, or something of that nature instead? I don't know. Very interesting. I'll talk more of this, no doubt. DniPro Modular have released KRAIT. This is interesting. I like it. I like it purely because it has a strangely vertical display. Waveforms on their side, I mean, fantastic. Let's just have it because it has that. I mean, why have waveforms which go this way? Let's have waveforms that go that way. That's far more interesting. I love it. It looks great. What is it? Well, it's a modulation device. So you've got knob recorder. You know, record the knob movement, send that out to your stuff, and have it beautifully displayed on this sideways vertical display thing. Or it can just be an LFO, or it can be a randomizer. And you've got 3 channels of it, 3 outputs, 3 lots of the stuff, one of it recorded, one of it LFO, one of it random, or, you know, swap that about. What an incredibly useful little module. And it's not big either. It seems to be simple, straightforward, which is what you want. Great. You know, love it. I think it's completely brilliant. You can even use it apparently as a mixer, so you could mix two modulations into one for a little bit of extra interest. But I love the way it looks. I love the functionality. Very, very simple. It's perhaps on the more expensive than you'd think at $230, but what a decent thing. Now, UVI do a lot of sampling, endless sampling. That's what they're about. They're about the sampling, and this time around they've sampled some of the classic samplers. Not sure how you sample samplers. Can't you just take the stuff that's in the sampler and use that? All right, do you have to sample the samples that are being run through the sampler in order to properly capture the nuance of the hardware that those samples are running through? I guess that's it. So what samplers are we talking about? We're talking about the emulators. Emulator 1, Emulator 2. Was there an Emulator 3? Yes, I think so. And also some drum machines as well. So those classic big fat emulator keyboards that you'd see Pet Shop Boys use on top of the pops. That kind of thing. You'll find these sounds on everything. I mean, they've got hold of all original libraries and have sampled the heck out of all of that in every kind of possible way you could possibly imagine. So you could probably sit and watch Top of the Pops on, old reruns of Top of the Pops on BBC 4 and play along. And there would all your sounds. You'd find all your sounds. And that would be great. We've also got a drum machine section featuring a whole load of samples from the SP12 and the Drumulator. And you can stick it all together into a massive thing. I mean, UVI have this workstation interface, which I struggle with. I don't find it that easy to use. I've got a few of their bits and pieces, and I find the interface rather distracting, which is a shame, because there's some phenomenal sampling that goes on in here, and you've just got to try to get over the whole UVI workstation interface thing in order to get into it. It's just a bit of a faff. However, something like this library is going to be extraordinary if you're into your 90s vibe or 80s vibe of sampling, and you're not going to find anything which replicates it as well as these people at UVI do, because they just do a thoroughly fantastic job of putting it together. And finally, are we going to Superbooth is the question. Really, a question I still can't seem to answer. I keep thinking about it. There was a moment there where I was almost going to go for 4 days. I was going to go for the whole week, right? But then it just got complicated with testing, and that the biggest problem potentially being if you're out there for more than a couple of days, you have to test while you're out there. And so if for any reason I would test positive while I was in Germany, I would have to spend 14 days in Germany at my own expense, and that would be a disaster. I can't do that. I just can't do that. I have a wife who works. I have kids who need to get to school. I have responsibilities and things to do here that are not just work related. It's not like, oh dear, I'm stuck in a hotel for 2 weeks. No, I've got a whole life over here that needs sorting out. And so taking a few days off to go and do it in the first place was major. But then to get stuck there to quarantine would be flipping disaster. So no, cannot do that. But then apparently if you bring it down to under 3 days, you can take a test before you go, which is valid when you return, and then that gives you some possibilities potentially. But there's still a lot of testing you have to work out and pre-book, and it's starting to get expensive, and you're not really quite sure where to get these tests from, and it gets complicated, and it's just like, this is too much, it's too much. So my other final option that I'm still hanging on to a little bit is that I could just go on the Saturday. I could fly out and fly back like I have done previously. That's not unusual. That's what I have done in the past. And that way, again, I've still got to do all the testing, but all the testing is here, not while I'm away, so it should all be valid. And that saves me, lowers the risk and the potential of catching it in the first place, and just gives me a day at the show. So that is a possibility still at this time, with a couple of weeks to go. The other side of it is that, well, there's loads and loads of people not going, as in manufacturers. The usual sort of manufacturers that I'd be looking forward to see, many of them are not going. So while there's plenty who are going, it still feels like it's going to be half a show. And for all of the faff and the difficulty of getting out there, I'm still weighing it up as to whether it's actually worth it. It'll undoubtedly be fun. I know that. I can't take my kids this time because that's just too difficult in trying to get testing on them because they don't have double vaccinated passports, etc. So I'd have to be out there on my own, fiddling about. I'm sure people are friendly and nice and say hello, but I'll still ultimately by myself, which doesn't sound that much fun. So I don't know. Still talking to myself about it. It seems at this point I'm on the it seems unlikely, to be honest. Maybe just forget it till next year. But if you can get out there, it will be a fantastic show without any doubt. I love what they've done in spreading it around the outside as well as the inside. So I think it could be a lot of fun. But we will see. So there you are. That'll do for August, I think, as we've already crept into September. The plan is I've got a load of stuff starting up again soon. I have taken a little bit of a break from making videos on stuff just because it's the summer and things like that, and I just needed to have a little bit of downtime from the intensity of making videos for people. But I will be starting that engine up again soon, and I will be kicking off with things like the optics, the BoredBrain stuff, the sound objects. Be doing a bit on that. I've got a Cosmotronic complex oscillator here called the Vortex, which is fascinating. I'm looking forward to plugging that in and giving that a really good go. I've got the Elmira distortion to make. I might do that as a live stream. Do a live stream bit of soldering, 2 to 3 hours, proper soldering, real time. Maybe I'll try to sort that out with the Elmira distortion. That could be interesting. I'll think about that. Also got a few software bits and pieces as well to think about, like the Abyss. I quite fancy doing a video on the Abyss, as well as Bitwig 4, Reason 12. Lots of possibilities. Sorry, I seem to be winking a lot today. I'm sorry about that. I don't mean, I'm not winking at you. All right. Yeah. It's just, I don't know. I think maybe I'm still tired. Maybe I'm a bit tired. Don't know. Anyway. That's enough for all of that. So are we doing a live stream this Sunday? Yeah, let's give that a go. See, I did it again. Lazy eye. So the 5th of September, that's this Sunday, I think. Let's do that, shall we? Get together. The last one, I quite enjoyed that after pouring my little heart out. You were all very kind to me, which was nice. So let's go and do that. Let's be more kind to me day. It's a live stream this Sunday, 8 o'clock, British summer time. We'll give that a go, shall we? Yeah, let's do that. And then probably give me another week and I'll get back into video making. There'll be lots of good stuff coming. Now, please do all those things like subscribe and to the YouTube channel and stuff. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, on the internet, all those sorts of things. If you're feeling daring and excitable, then do come and join us on Patreon. We can give you a couple of quid to help sponsor these videos, to make sure that they continue to happen and that you keep me in this game. I need your support. That would be great. If you could, if any of these videos have ever been useful to you, just consider giving us a couple of quid over a couple of months or forever. I don't mind either way. So there we go. I hope that was useful. And in the meantime, go make some tunes.